Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for today, which is July 12th, 2021. We're going to take a look at two interesting developments involving two hotspots, strategic hotspots, one being the situation in the Black Sea and the other one Afghanistan. Both of these areas are areas that have historically been targets for British geopolitical destabilization. In both cases going back to the 19th century up to the present. So that's a long arc of British geopolitical imperial ambitions in which there have been wars, regime change coups, total destruction, in which there is a possibility for peace, but that depends on moving outside of the realm of geopolitics. Now, there are 2 points I want to develop on this. The first has to do with the U.S.-Russian relationship. On July 9th, there was a 3.5 to 4 hour phone conversation between President Biden and President Putin. This was a follow-up to their June 16th summit in Geneva. Both sides had very limited comments on it, but what they talked about was important. There were two major issues discussed according to the readouts from both sides. One is the discussion of the ransomware attacks, where Biden went ahead and said to Putin, you have to stop this. If there are attacks coming from Russia, we will have to take some action. Putin, for his part, said that he has seen no evidence that this is Russian, but that there should be coordinated activity to protect not only both countries, but the whole world from this kind of cyber warfare. Psaki, the spokeswoman for Biden, said that the intelligence community is not fully sure where these attacks are coming from. And what ultimately was decided is that there will be ongoing joint committee discussion starting on July 16th, where representatives from both countries will get together and start looking into this. So that's a promising development coming off the June summit. Now, secondly, compromise at the UN Security Council on Syria. There was an effort spearheaded by Britain and the United States to limit humanitarian aid distribution into Syria only through Turkish checkpoints. The Syrians protested, the Russians protested. Up until the end of last week, it looked as though there was no compromise, and then all of a sudden there was a compromise, an agreement that there would be more cross-border humanitarian assistance, and the U.S. State's spokesman said this would include aid to all parts of Syria. This is a change in the U.S. position, and the Russian ambassador to the UN hailed this as a historic moment. So on two key issues. Now, by the way, this does not eliminate the Caesar sanctions, which are the killer sanctions that came from Pompeo and are continuing by the Biden administration, which are taking lives of Syrian people by withholding food, medicine, and parts and equipment. Nevertheless, it's a compromise toward a resolution. And this is something that could lead to further talks and further move to include having the U.S. troops leave Syria. Now, on the other side of the U.S.-Russia crisis, though, you have 6 more Russian companies that were sanctioned over alleged attempts to procure electronic components that are, quote, likely, unquote, to be used for Russian military programs. Likely? You sanction 6 companies based on a report that it's likely they were involved in something illegal? This points to the whole fraud of the sanctions regime, which is designed to criminalize a country and criminalize its businesses and punish them without having any evidence. This remind you of Russiagate, remind you of the Skripal affair and then the Navalny poisoning and so on. Well, that's the British modus operandi. The charges of Syrian government chemical weapons attacks, these are false flags and lies designed to create a hostile environment between Russia and the United States at a moment where we're seeing a glimmer of the prospects of what a dialogue could do. Now, Also, the Russians issued a warning to the U.S. about naval provocations from military exercises in the Black Sea. They said this undermines security there. But the Ukrainian Navy is hyping their involvement in the most recent maneuvers as proof that they can, quote, carry out common tasks according to NATO standards, unquote, which means the Ukrainians are continuing to push for being included within NATO, which the Russians have defined as a red line. So we see steps forward and steps backward, but the process of deliberation and dialogue is the most crucial point here. Now, here's something I'm sure many of you will find shocking. If you had a chance to go to the Schiller Institute website, you can see a statement from Helga Zepp-LaRouche titled, Afghanistan at a Crossroads, Graveyard for Empires or Start of a New Era. What Mrs. LaRouche writes is that we now have a potential to resolve what has been 150 or more years, almost 200 years, of confrontation over Afghanistan, with the British as the leading instigator, but also the Russian Empire involved, and then increasingly recently the United States. What if instead of confrontation over who controls the territory and the routes, there would be expansion of trade, expansion of connectivity, and peace? This is possible, Mrs. LaRouche writes, and the key to it is the initiatives coming from China with the Belt and Road Initiative. Is it possible to get the Taliban to participate in this? We also had a lengthy discussion at the LaRouche Organization Manhattan Project meeting on Saturday, which I participated in, both on the history of the confrontation, but also how to look at this situation with a different lens. Instead of seeing the day-to-day struggle, the civil war, the backwardness, the poverty, look at this situation from 50 years from now through the eyes of what are today children in Afghanistan. What if they had peace? What if they had access to modern healthcare, modern food production, jobs and industry, connection through high-speed rail with Asia and the Middle East and Europe? What could be the potential for that? And this was discussed in some detail by my colleague Hussein Askari and Shakil, a Pakistani expert on China, and also Diane Sayre and Dennis Speed. So I'd encourage you to go look at that dialogue as well as Mrs. LaRouche's statement. Now, the background to this, just read you a statement from the Afghan war administrator under Bush and Obama, Lieutenant General Douglas Lute, who said this in 2014. He said, quote, "We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. What are we trying to do here? If the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, who would say it was all in vain?" That's from the man tasked by Bush and Obama to coordinate the Afghan war effort. Now, this statement reflects what came out in 2010 from WikiLeaks, where they had documents on the Afghan war, which demonstrated precisely this lack of a strategy, a lack of a decisive commitment to end the war through development. But it nevertheless continued from 2010 to 2021, where we finally withdrew. 2,372 U.S. military deaths. Were they in vain? Well, that's why it's so important that a diplomatic process begin now. And it appears as though this is possible. We're hearing there's a civil war, there's all kinds of dangers and chaos. The Taliban are wild fundamentalists, which in the past has been true. But here's the question. If you remove all foreign interference, the Soviets, the US, the British, what would be the possibility for a real reconstruction to occur? Well, we'll see whether that can happen. There was a Taliban delegation in Tehran meeting with the Afghan government this last weekend that was sponsored by the government of Iran. And a U.S. State Department official said something again which is surprising coming from the United States. He said what Iran is trying to do may well be constructive, as Afghanistan's neighbors can help promote the cause of peace. There is also a Taliban delegation in Moscow. There are Taliban talks going on with China and with India. With the China question, it's the possibility of Chinese connecting Afghanistan to the ongoing Belt and Road Initiative. There are a number of projects which we've outlined over the years in the various reports we've produced on the New Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, development is the name of peace. If you provide people with a future, with an opportunity that comes from working together in harmony with other nations for common interests. And what are those common interests? End to hunger, end to disease, the idea that your children and grandchildren can have a better life through your efforts today. That's not been offered to the people of Afghanistan for the last 200 years, as the effort has been made by the British Empire in particular to make Afghanistan a zone of confrontation, not because they want to conquer Afghanistan, but to protect the British trade routes. And today the same thing is going on with the Great Reset. Protect the control of finance and economy centered in the hands of the central bankers who operate for the interests of the private bankers of London and Wall Street. Instead, what if we have peaceful economic development? This is a prospect now, but we can't leave it to governments to do. This is something which has to become your cause, the cause of the American people, to fight to make sure that what we've sacrificed over these years was not for nothing, but that out of it we can forge a peace that will point the way to a prosperous future for that part of the world. That's my report for today. I'll be back again tomorrow.